Hey, it's Darren coming at you from Tropicare Homestead. I'm taking a little break from some chores to get something off my chest, something that I'm actually very passionate about. It's pulling at my heartstrings. This video is dedicated to the younger generations, Gen Z, Millennials. These are my children and grandchildren. Of course, the information that I'm going to present here is really applicable to anyone. We have wars, rumors of war, inflation, and of course, if you listen to the government, inflation is just fine, but they're not counting food, energy, housing, and transportation. They don't count those things in their numbers. So obviously they can say things are fine and they're not actually lying. They're just omitting information about these four things. We have possible food shortages. There's just an array of shit hit the fan scenarios happening all at once. People are so divided right now. All of this propaganda coming at us from every different angle. They're lies, half-truths, misinformation, disinformation. People don't really know what to believe. They form an opinion, and pretty much everybody's opinion nowadays is based on at least half-truths. So who knows what the real truth is about what's going on in the world. But I do know that now is not the time to be divided. We need to come together. If you've been thinking about what you need to do to be prepared for what's coming, for whatever scenario, multiple scenarios possibly, just remember that one of the primary principles of prepping is that you can't do it alone. You have to have a community. Being part of a community is not easy for everyone, myself included. I like to keep to myself. I'm working on it, but it's not easy. It's just the way I am, the way I've always been. But now is the time to come together, talk to your friends, your family, find like-minded people. So if you've been thinking about prepping, this is a good video for you because I'm going to talk about the bare essentials and the basics of prepping. If you haven't even thought about prepping, you need to wake up. It's time to do it. The time is now. I know there's a stigma around preppers, but you don't have to be a prepper to be prepared. These preppers, they live a lifestyle. You don't have to live that full lifestyle to be prepared for shit hit the fan scenarios. I don't consider myself a prepper, but I do believe in being prepared. And I have a little bit of experience in a shit hit the fan scenario. After Hurricane Ian, we were without electricity for 7 or 8 days, and we were actually trapped on our property for 4 days. We had flooding on both sides of the road. We couldn't go anywhere. So we had to rely on the preps that we had. We did all right, but I definitely did find some deficiencies in my preps, and I'll address these as I go over the basics. So the scenario I'm going to cover is a week or longer without electricity and being stuck on your property. 3 of the primary things that you need to have in a shit hit the fan scenario are water, food, and shelter. As far as shelter goes, I'm just going to assume that you have a place to live already. I'm not going to talk about shelter because then you can get into bugging out and bugging in, and that's really out of scope for what I'm talking about. In the scenario I'm describing with no electricity, obviously having electricity is going to make a lot of these other things much easier. I was severely deficient in that category. All we really had was a little solar battery for our mobile devices, and that didn't even work good enough for the mobile devices. But since we rely on 4G, we didn't have internet anyway most of the time for at least 4 days. But since then, I've taken care of that. I got 2 nice big solar generators that should be able to power most of the house, possibly not the AC. I'm gonna have to work on that a little bit. So I highly recommend having some sort of power source, whether it be a solar generator, diesel generator, something so that you have power. But just keep in mind, if it's a diesel generator, you need to have a supply of diesel on hand because you can't leave to go get diesel. And when you do get to the gas station, they probably aren't going to have any diesel because everyone else is doing the same thing. So that's electricity. If you take care of your power needs, that's going to help everything else a little bit. The number one thing that you're going to need to prep is water. Stock up on bottled water, a lot of bottled water. You may still have running water in a grid down scenario, but can you trust that it's not contaminated? If you have a well like I do, make sure that you have some kind of manual pump so you can get water out of the well without electricity. That's a lifesaver. So assuming that you have some sort of water source other than the bottled water, you're going to need some kind of filter. And I personally use a Berkey filter. There are cheaper alternatives. I suggest getting water from that water source, putting it through the Berkey filter, then having some kind of container with another filter. So you have multiple levels of filter in your water. Of course, this is for drinking water. The water that you'll need to wash your dishes, for hygiene and flushing the toilet, doesn't necessarily need to be potable. It's not water that you'll necessarily drink. Okay, so that's water. Item number 2 is food. There are really 3 things that you can do, and in my opinion, you should do all 3 of these things. Number 1 is freeze-dried food. It could be MREs, it could be number 10 cans full of freeze-dried food. Buy as much as you can afford and stow that away. That's going to last 20, 30 years. Number 2, stock up on rice and beans, canned meat, canned vegetables. Store that in a cool, dry place. There are things that you can do that you might have to learn to make that stuff last longer, but don't let that stop you. Don't think that you have to figure everything out before you even start. Just get started and you can figure out things as you go along. You don't want to have analysis paralysis where you think you have to have everything perfectly figured out before you start. The most important thing is you start now. And number 3, every time you go to the store, buy a little bit more of what you normally buy. And then put that in the back of the cupboard. So it's first in, first out. Use the oldest stuff first, and you just rotate through your stock. If you do all 3 of those things, you should be set. And of course, with food, you'll need a way to cook. If you have some sort of power source, you may be able to use your stove. But I found that just a regular grill works fine. Propane grill, or even wood or charcoal. You'll be able to cook just fine with that. It's not going to be as convenient, but you know, a shit hit the fan scenario, what is going to be convenient? And category 3 is medical. Make sure you're stocked up well on Band-Aids, gauze, allergy meds, aspirin, ibuprofen, neosporin, all that day-to-day stuff. Make sure you have a good stockpile of that. And also make sure that you have a decent stockpile of any prescription meds that you're on. And you should have an IFAC for each individual person. An IFAC is an individual first aid kit. You can find these on Amazon very cheap. There's other websites you can get these. An IFAC is going to be used for a traumatic injury, something where you have a hole, a lot of bleeding. You'll have a tourniquet. You'll have plenty of gauze to stop the bleeding. You'll have some special medication in there to stop the bleeding, scissors to cut off the clothes to get them out of the way. You can buy a complete IFAC online. Remember, you need to have at least one of those for every person. And the third thing hits home, because on about day 2 or 3 after Ian, I actually got some kind of bacterial infection, and it was really busting me up bad. We couldn't leave yet because we were still flooded in, but I needed to get some antibiotics. Finally, on day 4 or 5, I was able to go to a hospital. It wasn't an actual hospital, it was a temporary military hospital. I went there to get some antibiotics, and that ended up helping. It didn't help right away, but it did help. It's not easy to get antibiotics because they're typically prescription, but there is a company called Jase Medical where you can get a prescription for emergency antibiotics. You'll have an online consultation with Jase Medical. They'll give you a prescription and send you the whole kit. The kit will contain 5 or 6 different antibiotics that will cover 50 plus different kinds of infections. That's going to be a lifesaver, trust me. Category number 4 is comms. So comms is really 2 things. Incoming information, you can get a cheap little radio that you can wind up and charge it that way, just so you can find out what's going on around you. An added bonus of having a little radio is you might be able to get some music. Because trust me, when you're trapped in your house for over a week, you'll find that music is something you've been taking for granted. A little bit of music goes a long ways towards calming the soul. But communication is also 2-way. So I suggest some sort of ham radio. You can pick up a very inexpensive handheld radio on Amazon. I'll put some links. So that kind of communications, you'll be able to receive broadcasts from emergency services, your local community, so you know what's going on, and you'll have a way to send messages out, because more than likely mobile service is not going to be working. But remember, one of the main principles of prepping is to have a community. So who are you going to communicate with? You need to build that community so that you have someone to communicate with. And like I said, I'm working on that myself. Category number 5 is security. Second Amendment, that's a divide and conquer line right there. But in a shit hit the fan scenario, especially the scenario that I think is going to happen, security is going to be important. I'm assuming that since you're watching this video, you're new to prepping, haven't really even started prepping yet, that maybe you're not a gun owner at this time. So I'm going to suggest something that, in my opinion, is a very good way to get started with firearms. The caliber should be 9mm, which is one of the less expensive calibers, even though it is going up in price again since we're having another ammo shortage. I'm even going to say that you should have a rifle and a pistol that both shoot 9mm and that both use Glock mags. There's a wide variety of pistols that use Glock mags, and there's a decent variety of different PCCs, pistol caliber carbine rifles that use Glock mags. I'm going to suggest something that's very budget friendly, something that I have right here, which is a PSA dagger. PSA is a company in South Carolina. They make an excellent Glock clone. You can pick one of these up for around 250 bucks. And the PCC rifle that I'm going to suggest is a Kel-Tec Sub 2000. Some of you may be laughing. It's actually a pretty good little rifle. It uses Glock mags, so you'll have mags that you can interchange between your pistol and your rifle. It's a nice little rifle that folds. You can put it in your backpack. You use your pistol to fight your way to your rifle. So that's a security starter kit. But let me stress, if you're truly serious about security, you're going to want to get an AR-15 sooner or later. This is just a starter kit that I suggested. AR-15 is by far one of the best weapons that you can have. So there you have it, my opinion on the bare essentials, basics of prepping. Prepping for non-preppers. Remember, you don't have to be a prepper to be prepared. Don't let that stigma scare you away. Just because you're being prepared for a scenario that is probably more than 50% likely of happening doesn't make you some kind of crazy prepper. Preppers aren't crazy anyway, it's just a lifestyle. I'll have links in the description for pretty much everything that I've talked about. And please leave me a comment. I'm really hoping that this helps you get started. If you've been thinking about it, this will be a little motivation to get started. If you haven't been thinking about it, I hope this wakes you up a little bit. So thanks for watching my video. Out.